Canada is an exceptionally enormous country. As a matter of fact, it is the second biggest after Russia. Hence, its 38 million occupants and such an enormous domain make it one of the nations with the most minimal populous thickness. To get a thought, China has a marginally more modest region than Canada. However, the Asian nation is home to 1.4 billion individuals. The US has a region pretty much similar in size to Canada's, nevertheless 330 million individuals live there, very nearly multiple times more than its northern neighbor. Yet, what is most striking about Canada is that 70% of its occupants live beneath this green line, regardless of whether you take this line further south. Half of Canadians live in this little region where Toronto and Montreal, the two most populated urban communities in Canada, are found. As you can see, this region dives deep into the core of the US. One might say that most Canadians live further south than Americans who live in the territories of Washington, Montana, North Dakota, Alaska and part of Minnesota and Maine. So the inquiries are, the reason did such countless Canadians settle here, having such an enormous and asset-rich region toward the north? For what reason didn't huge urban communities create a long way from the US line? What's more, how does the Canadian government mean to change what is happening? The clearest motivation behind why such countless Canadians live close to the US line is authentic. The principal European settlements in Canada were on the east coast, where they fished. In any case, inside the country, it was the fur exchange that ruled the economy for a long time. Afterward, the fundamental item exchanged, particularly with Europe, was a lumber. This exchange occurred through the San Lorenzo waterway. Around then, European boats could enter through this waterway, and it was likewise a simple way for Europeans to investigate the inside of North America, to that end the primary urban communities of Canada are situated on the banks of this stream, beginning with Quebec, Montreal and finishing off with Toronto. The primary city to create was Montreal, since it was feasible for boats to arrive there because of the hazardous rapids around there. It was the vitally port city on St. Lawrence Stream. Truth be told, Montreal was considered for quite some time the monetary and modern capital of Canada. However, during the 1970s, Toronto turned into the monetary and modern focus of the country. At the point when the country's trench was worked to keep away from the hazardous rapids of Montreal, enormous boats had the option to enter further inland, so urban communities like Toronto, Detroit, and Chicago acquired significance and became applicable business ports. At the point when the car had not been created and streets as we probably are aware today didn't exist, transporting was fundamental. Hence, the biggest and most significant urban communities in a nation typically approach the ocean or an enormous waterway. For instance, the Port of New York and its admittance to the 300-mile-long Hudson Stream, which permitted products to be shipped to the inside of the nation, gave New York a benefit over different urban areas. New York was the port that associated America with Europe and was the city where data, thoughts, the most recent innovations, and, most importantly, a huge number of settlers from Europe showed up first. Yet, with the creation of the car, it was at this point, not just the port urban communities that were alluring, as the car permitted the populace to spread to remote regions, leading to the development of other halfway urban areas on the inside. In any case, in Canada 80% of its occupants actually live under 160 kilometers from the line with the US, that is to say, close to the port urban communities. So the other inquiry is, the reason didn't enormous urban communities create a long way from the US line? Fundamentally on the grounds that notwithstanding being the second biggest country on the planet, a big part of its domain is covered by what is known as the Canadian Safeguard, which is a tremendous rough region with just a little layer of land, so horticulture turns out to be basically unthinkable. Likewise, temperatures in winter are extremely low. Thusly, the troublesome admittance to food and the freezing environment makes it truly challenging to shape enormous metropolitan in places like Toronto and Montreal. Going against the norm, the best arable land has forever been in the south of Canada, just underneath the green line where most Canadians reside, a long way from the ungracious grounds of the north. Agriculture in southern Canada is made possible by the Great Lakes region, which extend along the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. Lawrence Stream to the Atlantic Sea. This locale is somewhat little in the region, however vital for its high farming movement. Canada has under 1% of the total populace, however, has 15% of the world's freshwater supply. It is assessed that Canada has multiple million lakes, and this locale is called the Incomparable Lakes, which structures part of the boundary with the U.S., is viewed as the biggest freshwater region on the planet. The lakes retain the intensity and cool the air in the mid-year and afterward leisurely transmit that intensity all through the fall months, which keeps the regions close to the lakes from cooling as much as the parts farther away from the vast water do in the colder time of year. For this reason, the environment around here of southern Canada is so really great for farming. So 26 million Canadians live beneath that line in light of the fact that early European settlements utilized the Lawrence waterway for exchange, and because of the horticultural likely in the terrains close to the Incomparable Lakes, a thick organization of towns and urban communities were made. When Canada industrialized, it seemed okay to do so where individuals were at that point there, changing this district into Canada's metropolitan, modern and monetary focus. Consistently, it likewise checked out to be more like a nation like the US than to get comfortable the furthest north of Canada. Since the development of the railroad framework connecting Canadian urban areas like Toronto and Montreal with US urban communities, for example, Portland and Chicago, exchange and monetary ties have developed nearer between Canada and the US. Without a doubt, Canadian financial development has forever been like that of the US, as should be visible in this diagram that actions the gross domestic product per capita of the two nations from 1870 to 2010. Canada is quite possibly of the most extravagant, most steady, and created countries on the planet, and a portion of its urban communities rank high in the files of the best urban communities to live on the planet. Be that as it may, one of the issues confronting Canada is the maturing of its populace, and that implies less populace of working age. Consequently, it has an aggressive program that gets in excess of 300,000 new outsiders consistently, and the greater part of these foreigners, true to form, decide to live in the south of Canada, either in Vancouver, Toronto, or Montreal, among others. Hence, throughout the previous few years, Canadian pioneers need to populate the north of Canada, which stays quite possibly of the most unpopulated, and took advantage of the region on the planet. In 2016, a group of the public authority distributed a report that had a dream to arrive at a figure of 100 million occupants continuously 2100, or 62 million notwithstanding the 38 presently living in the country. As opposed to what's going on in the south, just somewhat more than 100,000 individuals live in the north, so one of the goals of drawing in a great many new settlers in the next few decades is to populate the north of Canada and hence exploit the monetary and international capability of that area. It is expressed that around there of northern Canada there are immense stores of unexploited normal assets, which could be essential to guarantee the nation's drawn-out monetary development. Also, the icy could later on presently not be a distant spot. This ice mass is softening, which could prompt the making of new delivery courses, both for the travel industry and for exchange with Russia and Northern Europe, for instance. Consequently, Canada needs to build its populace and urge future outsiders to live in the north, albeit in the transient most Canadians will in all probability proceed to live in the south, close to its adjoining nation and principal business and philosophical partner. Gratitude for watching. See you in the following video.